Morning, everyone. I request all of you all to settle down as we are starting the session now. This session focuses on education and culture, vectors of sustainable human development. The moderator for this session is Mr. Dilip Padgaonkar. Mr. Dilip Padgaonkar graduated in political science from Fergusson College, Pune, and obtained a diploma in direction and script writing from the Institute of High Cinematographic Studies in France, and received a doctoral degree in social sciences from the University of Paris. Sir served as a Paris correspondent of the Times of India. Sir worked as an international civil servant in UNESCO, first in Bangkok and then at the organization's headquarters in Paris. He has also been the editor of the Sharjah-based daily The Gulf Today. Dr. Padgaonkar has been a member of several national and international bodies, including the Indo-French Forum, the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library Society, the South Asia Free Media Association, the Prince Claus Fund of the Netherlands, and the Observer Research Foundation. In April 2002, President Jacques Chirac awarded him the Légion d'honneur, France's highest civilian distinction, for his services to journalism. The speakers for today's track are Dr. Anand Duriyappa, Director, Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, UNESCO Delhi; Ms. Pallavi Iyer, journalist and author; Professor Kring Sak, distinguished Thai scholar; and Mr. Satish Mehta, Director General, Indian Council for Cultural Relations. I request our moderator for the session to kindly take over.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to slightly change the format of this particular track because I feel that we need some more interaction with the students of Symbiosis who have been attending these sessions in large numbers. I'll come to that in a minute. But before I proceed, we are going to watch a video message that has been sent to us by Mr. Prakash Zavadekar, Minister of the Environment. He's currently attending an international conference in Lima. But before he left Delhi, he specially recorded a message for us. We'll take a look at that message and then we'll resume the deliberations of this conference. Can we have the video, please?
I'm really happy that the Symbiosis has organized a seminar or an international conference 2014 on India's Look East policy, a bridge to the Asian neighborhood. We are a different civilization, we are a different culture, we have a rich heritage. And as Asian as such, we have common aspirations, goals, problems and developmental path. So what India is doing today through Look East policy is that we are not dependent on the powers that be. We ourselves are becoming big power and we want to cooperate with each one of us. And that Look East policy is a testimony to that. I was asked to deliver a lecture on education and culture vectors of sustainable human development. This is really an important topic. But as I mean, away from India, I am unable to attend. And therefore, I am just meeting you through this video message. So I'll be short, just flagging of some issues on the education and culture. Because human being is not about only hunger, cloth, daily necessities, physical necessities, but it is about aspirations. And education gives the shape to the aspirations and empowers people. So a child of a labor working on the field of a landlord becomes the district magistrate of that district where all landlords and everybody has to come. This empowerment comes only through education. So education empowers. Culture shows us the way to live. Politics can provide means of livelihood. But why to live and how to live and enrich our life is shown by the culture. So if education is empowerment, culture is enrichment of life. And to that end, I think sustainable human development means quality of life. And therefore I am always happy while listening to Bhutan's president and Bhutan's ambassadors who talk consistently about happiness index. Because it is not only the material things which give you the ultimate satisfaction. Ultimate satisfaction comes from within. And that is the sustainable human development. We have to grow on all fronts. When I see patterns in education that people are going or adopting, preferring only IT or preferring only few branches and are not heading for arts, culture and many other disciplines, that's not a robust growth. And therefore, I would have been happy if I would have been there present. I would have delivered the full lecture. But on video message, I know the attention, that's the difference between the screen and the person. If you are present, you can talk for 30, 40 minutes and still get full attention. But if you are on screen, then that attention becomes bad after 7-8 minutes. And therefore, I wish this conference all the best. And I'll also expect that Vidya to deliver me the conclusions of this international conference, because Symbiosis has always been a seat of convergence, bringing all disciplines together. Because Symbiosis itself is a international education center where it actually started with Vidya's father doing all the cultural festivals. What he used to do is to organize intercontinental sharing of experiences through festivals. And that started, that is what is enrichment of life. That's a sustainable human development. That is one aspect of quality of life. And other, education, health, gender sensitivity, the human rights, values, freedom of expression, all put together gives you a broad framework of sustainable human development. It is the enrichment of life. And to that end, I think this conference will bring out more good issues to deal with. And I'll be happy and looking forward to see the conclusions which you draw, the deliberations you make, so that we can walk together for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
The Minister summed up, I think, the challenge before this session, enrichment of life. But before I go on, I'm eager to know what the students here expect from the deliberations of this particular track. So if there is anyone who wishes to either begin with a question or make a comment, please do so. No one around? Okay, please go ahead. Yes.
Morning, everyone. I, Dilip sir, was looking upon this track 4 because I remember last year also, it was also a major part of the conversation. My main question will be, I think, there is this way education is defined these days, and I remember Mark Twain's favorite quotation, and that is, I do not let schooling interfere with my education. So as a student, as an MBA student, and as all these MBA students, can you try, or can the panel try to distinguish between these two things? Because I think most of the students are leaning towards the school side, and they're forgetting the education side. And at the end of the day, there's this African saying, they say, as you go out of school, make sure you are not a brown, mouth-watering donut, which is at the end of the day very empty inside. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comment? Question? Yes, please, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. I wanted to ask you, despite there being a number of social cultural commonalities with Southeast Asian nations, most Indians still feel a sense of disconnect with them. So what role can the government play in bridging this gap?
Very well. Any more? Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Historically, commerce through the Silk Route has benefited all the South Asian nations. So I wanted to know that today, how can we rejuvenate these the cultural ties through the commerce that we're currently involved in? Thank you.
Very well. I think that should be enough. I'm sure the panelists have noted the observations and the questions. What I'd like to say in the next 2-3 minutes is simply this, that if you want to paint the current picture in the world today, you'll probably be doing it in 2 broad strokes. There is one tide sweeping our world, and that tide is a technologically driven commingling of economies. The second tide that is sweeping the world is a reaction to the first tide. That reaction sometimes is a positive one, but very often it has also resulted in people becoming more aware, of course, of what's happening in the outside world, thanks in particular to the explosion of mass media and the internet, but at the same time also becoming inward-looking. There is across the world a rise of nationalisms. There is across the world a rise of forces of extremism, of bigotry. People have become more and more narrow-minded, even as the opportunities for people to imbibe uplifting traditions from other cultures has never been greater. So I think this is within this broad framework of these 2 tides that are sweeping the world, one against the other, that we need to discuss both education and culture. This has happened, as far as Asia is concerned, only once in a big way in history, and that was towards the end of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th. And this is when, because of the predominance of the West, and particularly Western colonial powers, in large swathes of the world, and particularly in Asia, you had a large number of thinkers who began to react against this domination, including the domination in the intellectual sphere, with all kinds of responses. What triggered, I think, this enormous amount of interrogation and self-interrogation was, I believe, Japan's triumph over Russia in 1905. And you had thinkers across the world, across the what is known as the developing world, that reacted to this victory of Japan's in very interesting ways. So right from Ataturk in Turkey to Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, right from intellectuals in Japan, in Korea, to people like Sun Yat-sen, later on Mao Zedong, and of course in India, it was the response of people like Gandhi and Nehru that conditioned a lot of these thinking. And of course, I should also mention that much the same thing happened in what is today known as West Asia, because you had leading figures from places like Morocco, from Egypt, from Iraq, from Syria. These were, again, thinkers who were able to come to grips with this domination that was happening. And of course, the responses, I said, were extremely varied. Again, broadly speaking, and I'm caricaturing some very sophisticated arguments, broadly speaking, I think the responses were of three orders. One was to reject wholesale whatever the West had to offer. The other was to accept wholesale what the West had to offer. And the third was a highly tense, complex way of trying to adapt to whatever the West had to give, not just by way of technology, but also by way of ideas, and to adapt them to suit your own conditions. And this process, I think, goes on. It is likely to accelerate in the new conditions of the world, where, as you know, the center of power, and particularly economic power, has or is shifting decisively to Asia. And therefore, all the more reason for those of us who live in Asia to get to understand each other much, much better. And in a sense, this is happening. This is happening certainly it's happening in popular culture. And I'm just going to ask you, I mean, I'm sure, is there any young person here who hasn't heard of Psy and Gangnam? How many have heard about him? How many dance it? Well, he comes from, as you know, South Korea. And he's really captivated young people across the world. Much the same thing is happening to Bollywood. I mean, I've been traveling to several countries in Asia and elsewhere. And there again, it's Shah Rukh Khan who rules the roost, more than other Indian. And so on and so forth. But we had that happening in the past, from 1915, 16 onwards. The one Indian who was known throughout the world, and particularly here in Asia, was Tagore. And Tagore first visited Japan in 1916, and there he even composed a poem which said that, look, our saffron-robed monks came to Japan and taught you Buddhism, or what he called the Dharma, and now we come to you Japanese, to learn from you, your techniques, because this is where we are going to acquire our karma. And there was a response to this also from a great thinker of that period by the name of Okakura. And Okakura, and this is where I'm going to end, this is what he had to say. Arab chivalry, Persian poetry, Chinese ethics, and Indian thought all speak of a single Asiatic peace in which there grew up a common life, bearing in different religious, different characteristics, blossoms, but nowhere capable of a hard and dividing line. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the deliberations of today will be to make sure that the frontiers that separate us are no longer barriers, but bridges. And these are bridges of understanding, bridges where we get to appreciate cultures. And I'd go further and say, look, this is required not just across nations, but very often within nations. It's very hard for people, for example, who are used to the Khayal traditions of North Indian music to appreciate the extraordinary wealth of Carnatic music. What, however, has happened is that the favorite dish in many Chennai restaurants that I've gone to is a tandoori chicken, and the favorite dish in Delhi in many restaurants is the idli sambar. I think that already is some progress. but I think we'll have to go much before. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we start. I'm going to ask the first speaker to come up, and I think following the admirable lead given by Prakash Zavadekar, I will insist that each speaker speaks for no more than 12 minutes. At 11 minutes, I shall strike my glass once. At 12 minutes, I shall strike it twice. And after 12 minutes, I will continue to strike it until the next speaker comes. Thank you very much. So I now would like to invite Dr. Ananta Dorapaya, Director of the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. He is with UNESCO in Delhi.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. As I'm going to be having a very tough taskmaster there, I better put my watch on a timer there. Now, I have 12 slides. I broke the cardinal rule that psychologists say that attention span does not go beyond 7 slides. But I'm opportunist, so I'm hoping that you'll bear with me for the 12. So I was asked to talk about India and the Look East policy on educational opportunities. Let me start off with the international mandate. Now, how many of you have heard of the Millennium Development Goals? Looks like the university is doing a good job, because most times I don't get any hands up there. Now, how many of you have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? All right, good. So what I have here is just 2. As you know, that we are now kind of finalizing the negotiations. And these are there are 17 right now, but I've just pulled out 2, which I think are very relevant to what we're talking today. So the first one is, if you look at that, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And then this SDG number 16 is promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable. Now, there's a lot of overlap between the 2, but if you've been in the negotiation processes, countries are not rational. And they don't sort of sit down and sort of look and sort of see the links. They said, no, this is what I want on the board, and that's what they will negotiate. Now, there's a number of interesting questions that were brought forward by the students, and I'm trying to address that while still going through my presentation. I look at education as a triple dividend. Now, the first one is what we always use, increase the productive potential of an economy. As an economist, that's what we're looking at. How good a machine you are to produce the so-called outputs of an economy. And that's where I think a lot of our education systems have failed. We've done a really good job on doing that. So it's content management. Content, in a sense, bringing in a lot of the technical know-hows. How do you go about pushing the frontiers on science and technology? Now, I've put there 50% of a country's wealth is human capital. This is just a report that was released a couple of days ago in Delhi. It sort of tries to turn around by looking at a country's wealth as measuring its progress rather than GDP. And what I want to kind of keep this at the back of your mind. 55% is actually the country's people. That's where their wealth is. And that's where most of the investment should be. But it only takes about 3 to 4% of the investment. Most of it goes to infrastructure, roads, bridges. Now, I'm not saying those are not important, but it looks like the one that is the major part of our wealth, there's hardly much investment going on in that area, and that's the education component. Now, the second one, which is interesting, is increase the awareness of the broader societal linkages and interdependence. So I call it the constitutive dimension. And this is where we have kind of really lost a lot of ground over the years. I talked to her about the civics. I talked to her about the moral imperative. And I'll talk a little bit about what the Institute focuses on. We focus on three major components: peace education, sustainable education, and this is a new word, and I'm very surprised that the international community has taken this on, global citizenship. And I think this is an important concept that we really need to look at. We take our inspiration at the Institute from Carl Sagan's paraphrasing. We are nothing but a small blue dot when you look at it from the cosmos. And here we spend all our time trying to fight over resources, us, them. And when you look at within the broader cosmos, it seems very futile what we're doing. It's a very fragile planet. And it seems to be that more cooperative behavior is what we need to be working on. We need to be thinking about not us and them, but us as one collective society. And I'm not sure how much of that is actually going through our education systems. And so that's the third one. I call it a positive externality. How many of you take economics? Do they teach economics here? All right. So all of you know what positive externalities are. Well, most of you are very used to negative externalities. I like the positive externalities, and that's what the positive ones are. So when you look at India's approach within this region, you can look at it as a hegemony in the region, a powerhouse. Or, and I said it's outdated, it's an outdated concept. Most countries really don't buy this anymore. It's cost ineffective. As an economist, again, I find this, when you do the cost-benefit analysis, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And in a way, I kind of have a broad statement that nation-states might be an outdated concept. I'm a fan of Star Trek, so that's why you'll find me going towards that. The Federation planet. Or be a peace and sustainability leader for the region. Play the role of a knowledge broker. Play the role of the innovator. Play the role of the facilitator, and play the role of the peace broker. So this is a major challenge. Which way do you want to move? And I think if you look at some of the countries that have moved in the past, and Canada is an example, the Scandinavians, the second part tends to have a much more sustainable process than the first. And then I'm just looking at the methodology. I won't spend too much time on this. You got the hard approach, which is basically infrastructure, twinning programs, the massive open online courses. I'm just focusing on education here. And then you got the soft one, the student exchange, foreign student support. There's a lot of that going along. And this is what, if you look at what the US used to do back in the 60s, a lot of this was put into their vision as education, using education as a foreign policy. Now I want to spend a little bit of time here on the content. So I've got three: the peace education, sustainability education. How many of you know that when did we end did you know that there was a decade for sustainable development? All right, we just finished it last month in Nagoya. And then we have global citizenship education. That's now the new kid on the block. So UNESCO has taken this quite strongly in their program, but so has the Secretary General in his Global Education First initiative. Global citizenship, quality, access, and global citizenship are the three main pillars of his education portfolio. And then you got the STEMs, science, technology, engineering, maths, which seems to be like that's the main thing that most countries are pushing for. Because why? That's the first aspect, the productive potential of our populations to produce it, produce, and produce. And what we are trying to do is, look, STEM is going to be there. We need science. We need technology. We need to push those frontiers. But we need to build into that whole discipline, into that whole curriculum, the notion of empathy, the notion of understanding. I'm not talking about, in fact, when you read a lot of the international documents, they talk about tolerance. Tolerance is not enough. that means you're just tolerating the person. No, that's not what we are looking at. It's about understanding and embracing diversity. So when we talk about global citizenship, we are not talking about one homogeneous group of people. We are embracing the cultural diversity across the world, but try to understand how we live and work with each other. So I did a SWOT analysis. One of the things, the gentleman up there talked about an MBA. So one of the problems with an MBA is the first thing they do is teach you to do a SWOT analysis for everything. Bad habits can't be taken off. So I did a SWOT analysis. So I did the strengths of India. And it's interesting, English. I put English there not to sort of say that this is going to be the dominant language throughout the world. But in a sense, this is one that binds a lot of people around the globe and the planet. And within this region, India has that advantage. Then you got the cultural diversity. I haven't seen any place as in India where you have all the different cultural diversities in this region. When I'm talking about the region Asia Pacific within this country. So the Northeast, I was very surprised when I came to India, when I looked at the Northeast and I thought they were all Chinese. And then when they open their mouth, they speak Hindi and they speak. So it was an interesting cultural experience for me to see that. And my wife was more shocked because she's Chinese, and she was like more shocked when she saw Chinese-looking people talking Hindi and conversant. So those cultural divides are actually not there. I think we cognitively put it out there, but it's really not there in a sense. Then you got ICT, the information communication technology. At the Institute, we are really taking ICT. So how many of you, not the 4 or 5 rows in the front, but the ones at the back, how many of you play games? So that's one of the things that we are really building is doing curriculums through games. Fun games, not learning games, because that's boring. I've taken learning games and I just stopped doing it. It's just boring. But fun games, but in the process of playing the game, you actually start to address all these issues of empathy, understanding. We're not focusing on the pure disciplines, but just looking at pushing the notion of global citizenship. That's our primary goal, through games. And it could be through games of violence, because apparently kids really like when people are out there shooting at each other. But you can do it with reverse psychology, not a big deal. So Halo, Assassin's Creed, I love playing those things. But how do we do that with a reverse psychology built into that particular game, that you start learning all the negative externalities of that? Then you got the freedom and democracy of India. You have heard that a lot this morning, the largest democracy in the world. Then you got the historical heritage. As you say, there's a word in the Sanskrit, the world is a global village. Global citizenship is not a new concept, people. It's been there for a long time. Now, they say that it's in the Greeks, but it's also in the Hindu philosophy. So it spans across the world. Then you got the cost effectiveness. I can't resist, as an economist, it is more cost effective. We will waste a lot less resources than the way that we do use the resources these days. And then you got the skilled educational labor force in higher education. India's weaknesses also has the same long list. You got high transaction costs. I don't know how many of you do institutional. I didn't want to put bureaucracy there because it wasn't the right thing to do, but I've hidden it through high transactional costs. Poor public relations. In a way, India has got a lot of strengths, but it doesn't do a good job in taking it out to the rest of the world. My institute is a perfect example. It's a UNESCO Category 1 institute. It's the only Category 1 institute in this whole region, in the Asia Pacific. The major source of funding comes from the Indian government. It was a major foresight in part of the Indian government, but yet very few people know about this. So I don't think India does enough of a PR. You might want to get a PR campaign going on. Then you got the national standards. Universities, I guess, now are going through this fact is, the credibility of the universities. Apparently not a single Indian university is in the top 200. Now, you might want to question the ways those standards have been established, but as of right now, they do a pretty good correlation between those ranking and the quality of work that is done. If you just take the top 10, Harvard, Stanford, the number of creativity that's going on. Low international recognition, that's one. Inward looking. Now, low academic creativity. Now, I was just wondering whether I should put this on, whether I'm going to be stepping on a landmine here, but I have the data to support it. So I decided I'll do that. We don't allow students to be creative, to question the teachers, to challenge, to push. Most of the Indians who have gone and done great things had to go to the US to do it. That's a fact. Now, why do I say I have data? Because we have something that we call total factor productivity in economic language, which sort of says the technological creativity. India has a negative number. But don't despair. China has a bigger one. So that's another thing that one has to focus on. Let's give the space for the young men and women. I was going to say kids, but they're not kids. They are young men and women. The space to explore, to make mistakes. Mistakes are not a problem. Mistakes are actually good, because the only way you learn is by making mistakes. And if you don't make mistakes, something is wrong. That's the first one. Okay. So these are India's opportunities. High demand in the region. It's got the cultural links. We have heard all about that this morning. The globalization process is there. We're not going to stop that globalization process. It's just going to get more and more as a globalized village. And then the ICT development, this is one of the best places for that developments. Competitors, and then you got an educational lockdown. The reason I use the word lockdown is that some countries might want to sort of, education is a very sensitive issue, as you know. You got rewriting of history according to what the people want. So education is guarded by most countries very closely. So you might get a lockdown in that way. And that might be a problem when India wants to take its soft power through the region, through education. So a way forward, a national vision, I think, is necessary. You just can't do it ad hoc, each one doing that. So it's not the Wild West. A national strategy, and then a roadmap, and then the quantifiable indicators. Nothing new about this. And that's the concluding. So I come back to three dividends. You strengthen your own system. Your education systems in the region are strengthened, and then you have your influence not through a hegemony approach, but through soft power, through education. You get the rest of the world, the rest of the region, part on your same platform, and the platform should be global citizenship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Duraiappah. I think you've set a record in brevity since this conference began, because you've exceeded your time by just about 2.5 minutes, which is very good. The next speaker is Pallavi Iyer. Pallavi is the author of 2 extremely interesting books, one based on her years of stay in China, and the other her years of stay in Europe, basically in Brussels. She currently lives in Jakarta and therefore has had vast exposure, I think, to Asia. And I'm going to ask her also, while she speaks, to address some of the concerns that you heard from the students.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a really great pleasure for me to be here today, and a big and warm thank you to everyone at Symbiosis for having made this possible. I've been living in countries, in Asian countries outside of India, first in China between 2002 and 2009, and now in Indonesia for the last 2 years, so for most of the 21st century. But I have to say that I came to Asia later in my life. Like most people in my generation, and indeed, going by the comments of the students earlier this afternoon, by people who are currently in university, we didn't really see or understand much of the world through an Asian lens. What we had instead was very much a Western lens. This had something obviously to do with language. We were educated in English, and this opened up a whole world of cultural references that were very much Western focused. There was nothing in my education that allowed the rest of Asia, particularly East Asia, to have any kind of emotional resonance with me. There was a disconnect, as was put earlier. I remember in the late 1990s, somebody asked me what was the culture that I felt was most alien to my own. And I thought about the Chinese, which was really strange considering that we have a 4,000 kilometer long boundary with them. But this was really the country that was the most other in many ways, that was the most inscrutable. I studied in England, I studied in the US, I've lived in many parts of Europe, and I Eurorailed as a teenager in 1994. And, there was immediate resonance with the West. I knew this place. I was familiar with the foods. I had seen movies that were situated in these parts of the world. I had read literature that connected me to these parts of the world. But that was not the case for what ended up being my home for most of the 21st century, China and then Indonesia. So it's been a very interesting journey for me over these last 13 or 14 years, a very surprising journey for me as I have come to learn in very unexpected ways about the deep civilizational and cultural links that we do in fact share with these parts of the world. When I was growing up, I used to find the whole idea of Asia a bit patronizing. I almost found it Orientalist. I used to think, what does an Indian have in common with the Chinese, with Southeast Asia? We have very disparate cultures. There is no such thing as an Asia. It's a European construct. I bought into this. But I have to say that over the last 14 or 15 years, I have changed my mind very decisively. China. When I moved to China, it did seem an alien culture, an inscrutable culture. Things were not familiar. But that changed very quickly. In almost every way, in many, many, many cultural ways, in the way in which people address each other on the streets, there was gradually a familiarity that dawned on me. In China, when you meet a stranger, you call a man shushu, a woman ai, which is the same as auntie and uncle. When I lived in Europe, I had my son once talk to a neighbor and say, "Hello, auntie." And she turned to him and said, "My dear, I'm not your auntie." There was a distancing immediately. This would never happen in China. In China, in my first few weeks traveling around by taxi, I would have taxi drivers turn around and point at me and say, "Ladze, Ladze." And I used to be like, who the hell is this Ladze? What is Ladze, right? So I would be, "Ladze sir say, what is Ladze?" And at some point, they would turn around and start saying, "Abalagu, Abalagu." And I realized that Ladze was actually Raj Kapoor. It is the Chinese term for Raj Kapoor, the Chinese word for the Chinese name for Raj Kapoor. I went to the Shaolin Temple. Everyone's heard of the Shaolin Temple. Yeah, it's the birthplace of Chinese martial arts. And when I walked in, I saw this statue that was commemorating somebody called Damo. And he looked Indian. And when I ended up speaking to the priest at the Shaolin Temple, I realized that the Shaolin Temple had in fact been constructed by an Indian Buddhist monk. And then eventually there was another monk called Batuo who's also honored over there. So there are very deep and surprising connections that pop up very unexpectedly. But the really strong connections came out when I moved to Indonesia. And not just between India and Indonesia, but this idea of Asia. Because in Indonesia, we really see the commingling of Chinese culture and of Indian culture coming together. For any Indian in Indonesia, the rhythm of life, the pace of life, the weft and warp of the atmosphere is very familiar. It starts off with the language. The language of Indonesia is Bahasa Indonesia. Bahasa comes from Bhasha, the Sanskrit term. The national airline of Indonesia is Garuda Airlines. In the streets of Jakarta, you have all these buses that were advertising an energy drink. And the name of the energy drink was Kuku Bhima. And then I discovered that it was because of, this is Bhima from the Mahabharata. And if you drink Kuku Bhima, you will become as strong as Bhima. Indonesia, of course, was a Hindu-Buddhist culture for centuries. But even when it was converted to Islam gradually over the 16th and 17th centuries, a lot of this conversion happened via Indian Muslims from Gujarat, as well as Chinese Muslims, which is something that is less well known. So it's impossible to deny these very strong interlinkages that have woven Asia together, so that Asia is historical fact, even though it has been disrupted, first by colonialism, secondly by post-colonial autarky, and therefore it is often not lived or experienced as united, which is something that's very unfortunate. I was asked to talk a little bit about unity in diversity in the Indian and Indonesian context, and I'm very briefly going to go into this before stopping. How many more minutes, Dilip? 5. Okay. You know, Indians rarely agree on much, but there is a rare consensus on the belief in Indian exceptionalism. Rightists, leftists, opportunists always find themselves on the same page in holding the idea that as a country and as a civilization, India is somehow uniquely diverse, uniquely contradictory, uniquely large, tolerant, and complex. I bought into this idea, and this was an idea that was actually reaffirmed to me when I first lived in China and then in Europe. China, with its one official language, standardized written script, one major ethnicity, and political tendency towards homogenization, does make India seem uniquely diverse. Again, when I moved to Europe and discovered the 19th century European ideal of the nation state, which was based on the idea that the only legitimate nation state is one that's based on a single ethnicity, a single religion, a common language, and a common enemy often. Again, India defied this. It was an exception to this. And so this, again, boosted my belief in Indian exceptionalism. But then I moved to Jakarta, and I realized that Indians were not so much exceptional as much as ignorant. Our obsession with rising China and the wealthy West had blinded us to our civilizational sibling and democratic neighbor Indonesia, because this was a country that was as eclectic, unruly, and tolerant as India. As sprawling, complex, and implausible as India, and yet a country that was really hyphenated with India, even as India and China are constantly squashed together into this ungainly word, Chindia. Given its size and strategic significance, Indonesia is possibly the most underappreciated country in the world. It has 250 million citizens. It is the world's 4th most populous nation and its 3rd largest democracy. It is spread over 17,000 islands that, if superimposed on a map of Europe, would spread from Ireland to the Caspian Sea. It is home to 719 languages spoken by people from over 360 ethnic groups. Around 88% of Indonesians self-identify as Muslims, making the country home to the largest Islamic population in the world, but it also recognizes 5 other official religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Protestantism, Catholicism, and Confucianism, each of which have substantial adherents. An Indonesian from, say, Aceh in the northern tip of Sumatra and, say, Papua, some 5,200 kilometers to the east, have about as much in common as a Manipuri from the northeast of India and a Tamilian. What is Indonesia's national motto? Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. Multiple but one. This Sanskrit-tinged phrase is the Indonesian national motto and is in essence identical to the idea of unity in diversity in India. And it really underscores the accomplishment of the two states and having woven together this kind of unified national tapestry out of a multiplicity. Politically, too, India and Indonesia are like doppelgangers. Noisy rallies demanding trade unionists and a free and assertive press are part of the political landscape in both countries. I was going to address 4 quick themes in this university and diversity context, but because of our stentorian moderator, I'm going to limit myself very quickly to 2 of these themes, religious diversity and linguistic diversity. Perhaps the greatest challenge that both India and Indonesia are confronted by is ensuring that democracy does not turn into the tyranny of the majority in what are very pluralistic societies. Both India and Indonesia are fragile, yet inspiring achievements. They are both polities that have turned away from theocracy as the basis for nation building, but at the same time, they allow religion an active space in public life, unlike secular European, secular modern European countries. As a result, they're sort of involved in a kind of experiment where they are developing a third way. For countries where religion remains an important part of the identity of most citizens, unlike, say, in largely agnostic Europe, but where the more exclusionary and intolerant aspects of religion are held in check. Indonesia is a Muslim-majority country, and unlike India, whose constitution, the preamble to the constitution makes reference to the word secular, Indonesia's constitution issues the word secular altogether. Instead, it is based on a founding doctrine of Panchashila. And the first tenet of this founding doctrine is belief in the divinity of the one God. What is crucial is that it does not make any reference to any specific God, even though at the time of independence, there were strong Islamist elements within the country that wanted a reference to Allah. Instead, there is only belief in God that is expressed, and the Indonesian constitution also protects the right of citizens to freedom of religious belief and practice. As India and Indonesia feel their way into the 21st century, there are inevitably confusions about and contestations about their founding ideas. Conceptually, we remain works in progress rather than polished accomplishments, but this only underscores how germane our experiences, our achievements, our failures in this context are for each other. The second and final comparison that I will make in the unity and diversity context is to do with linguistic plurality and language. Another challenge that both India and Indonesia faced as modern but plural nations was that of national language. For newly independent nations, the choice of an official national language is crucial, often controversial, made specially so in the context of countries that are polyphonic. In China, the Communist Party had opted for Putonghua or Mandarin, the language of the capital Beijing. In India, the initial intention of the post-colonial state was to adopt Hindi as the official language. This was abandoned, and instead a plurality of languages were granted recognition. The divergent linguistic paths followed by China and India can be explained in part by the fact that the majority of Chinese languages, unlike their Indian counterparts, are united by a common writing system, which perhaps makes the imposition of a single language more palatable. But the sprawling archipelago of Indonesia, an agglomeration, I had said, of 17,000 islands, home to 700 languages, many of which don't share scripts or linguistic roots, is more directly comparable to India. Yet, Indonesia too chose to adopt a single national language, Bahasa Indonesia. The idea that a nation requires a national language to act as a social glue is hardly uncommon. But what makes Bahasa Indonesia noteworthy is that it was neither the language of the majority of Indonesian citizens nor of its political elite. Those labels belong to Javanese, a language spoken by the majority of the inhabitants of Java, which is Indonesia's most populous island and the political center of the nation. The Republic of Indonesia consequently made an unusual decision when it bypassed its majority language in favor of a variety of Malay, whose standardized form was dubbed Bahasa Indonesia. The many Javanese nationalists involved in the discussions at the time not only agreed to this, but actively advocated Bahasa Indonesia as the logical choice for a national language. because they were keenly aware of the need to avoid conflating nationalism with any single ethnicity or religion, given the complex plurality that they were attempting to unite. Today, just as Bollywood and cricket are often believed to hold India together, it is Bahasa Indonesia that is most often cited as the cement that binds Indonesia together. But despite the fact that it is the language of government, bureaucracy, schools, and the media, only about 20 million people actually speak Bahasa Indonesia as a first language. In contrast, 70 million people speak Javanese as a first language, 25 million Sundanese, which is another language. So, but Indonesia has really been an experiment in engineering a minority language into the official language. And it's brought about a strange dichotomy between the spoken and the written word. When they write, Indonesians almost exclusively write in Indonesian, in Bahasa Indonesia. There hasn't been a daily newspaper in Javanese, for example, for decades. And the literature that they produce is also invariably in Bahasa. Some blame this phenomenon for the fact that Indonesian literature remains somewhat underdeveloped and has failed to match the international success of its Indian equivalents. Also, the push to convert the country to a national language has meant that several other indigenous languages are threatened. The Javanese script has almost died out. The Balinese script has almost died out. In fact, 1 in every 4 Indonesian languages is endangered. India has taken a very different path, but language continues to be a burning issue. Attempts to Sanskritize Hindi, whether Sanskrit is something that binds the country together or perhaps divides the nation. We only need to look at the current row surrounding German and Sanskrit and how it's taught to see how important language ends up being in plural countries. And the larger point is that while India and Indonesia have taken very different paths on the national language issue, there are interesting trade-offs that have been made in both countries, and they are surely worth studying in a kind of comparative context. India and Indonesia have their differences. Whenever I compare the two, I always get a lot of feedback on Twitter, on Facebook about how can you compare the two countries? India is so different, we have so many more people and so on, different set of challenges. But while India is indisputably more populous, this does not necessarily make India more diverse or more complex a country than Indonesia. In any case, such nitpicking is superfluous. It's not necessary or desirable for either country to copy each other's choices, but their experiences surely provide the other with food for thought, with hitherto unconsidered possibilities, with alternative ways of approaching common dilemmas, from confronting terrorism to balancing the needs of the economy and the environment. A list of the most fundamental challenges confronting Indonesia today could just as well be India's. Cleaning up politics and public life, harnessing the nation's demographic dividend to productive use, fixing creaking infrastructure, maintaining nationalist ideals of respecting religious freedoms, and trying to find the right power-sharing equations between the center and far-flung provinces. To anyone who knows China and India well, it is fairly clear that any hopes for an entity called Chindia are chimerical at best. But a closely intertwined India and Indonesia is historic fact. Long centuries of colonization and post-colonial autarky might have obfuscated this fact, but it remains waiting to be rediscovered. Ultimately, what India and Indonesia are doing should give each other hope that it is possible to form unity out of fractured multiplicity, that the ideal of the 19th century European nation state is not the only one, and that there are many ways to finding nationhood. We are a third way, and our achievements and failings can be legitimately judged against one another for mutual benefit. I'll keep it at that to keep it in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. Thank you. May I now request Professor Kriensak to please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say how grateful I am for the invitation to be here for this great event at the university and the topic that you have chosen. Let me be very brief in my presentation by starting out by saying this, that my life has been very much a combination of academia and also politician. In academia, we talk about facts. And in politics, we talk about fantasy. So what we do when you combine the two is you have fantasized fact. And I hope what I'm going to share with you would be a little bit more than what I have said. There's another thing that we often say in Asia, in my area of the world, that if you do not know what to do, then they invite you to teach. But if you don't know how to teach and do, they make you a consultant. Consequently, politicians, they look upon things and they just give their consultation. They don't do things. They don't achieve things. They don't know what to do. Whereas in academia, basically, you only talk and you don't act. And this topic is about looking east and acting east. I couldn't help but wondering whether we are going deep enough. In the other part of the world I'm coming from, we look west to you, to India. You look east to us. And hopefully, we could link us together in some form. So I was searching with everything I could to think about what are the common things that we could have together when we look, either we look past one another or we merge somehow. My point, therefore, is really clear. Maybe your topic is a little incomplete. Look east, act east may be inadequate. You have to think east first before you're even able to see things in your looking and to be able to acting in your looking. Therefore, my discussion today would be the thinking part. The thinking part will come forward in education, and the value behind the thinking will be the culture. Therefore, when you have deep thinking, your education is enmeshed in your culture. Maybe when you think east together, possibly we can find a solution in looking east, acting east together. What is the common denominator among us in the East who are non-Western? If I may draw a key proposition would be this. The West tends to be more individualistic, whereas the East tend to be more collective in our way. Collectivism versus individualism. If you try to find a grand ideas to unite us in the East, be it from India, Bangladesh, ASEAN, all the way to Japan and so on, what are the things that can unite us? And the grandest one thing that I can think of is the collectivism mentality that we have that could really make us able to intertwine, to bridge us, and to bring us together. If we do not emphasize such, we will be using Western model in bridging us and hoping that we could be together in unified pluralism. My suggestion, therefore, in my topic today, my PowerPoint is not here, so let me just talk without having my PowerPoint then. Oh, it's there. Come very quickly in India. What is the way that, how could we do to make sure that our society, when we integrated together, working together, linking, bridging together, thinking together, what kind of thing we want? You have mentioned in your topic for me, sustainable development. There's myriads of definition. And the connectivity that we would like to have in sustainable development, as you see, the various infrastructure, connectivity, road, maritime, various things that you talk about in the previous sessions, what are we leading it up to? Is it just for temporary economic well-being, or would we like sustainable development? Let me briefly tell you, in my mind, in what goal do we have in common together? Do we want economic prosperity with sustainability or just prosperity? I would say if we have the common goal, economic prosperity, balancing with sustainability, political freedom, balancing with political stability, social cohesion, balancing with diversity. If that three pillars, economics, politics, and societal, if we could find some clear collective definition of sustainability that we look for in merging ourselves together, in working together, maybe we could find some solution in our unity in moving that way. The world has debated unceasingly what is sustainable development. The Bhutanese talk about gross national happiness. We hear today, I was in Bhutan a week ago. Many alternative kind of definition. They have talked about the Earth Charter, which talk about various key elements in wanting a sustainable society to be. Respect and care for the community of life, ecological integrity, social economic justice, democracy, nonviolence, and peace. Let's assume that we adopt the Earth Charter or similar things, or even my definition of sustainability in the three pillars I mentioned just now. Whatever forms we like it to take, let's assume we are in collective agreement in some of those. What role do education play? Let me jump across. In a macro scene, how do we work together in our relationship of linking, bridging together to create sustainable development in whatever fashion or form we agree? My suggestion would be very clear. One, we need to structure and integrate sustainable development that we agree upon in our education system, so that when India work together with ASEAN, for example, and the rest of Asia, our systems are compatible. How could we create an integrated economy, society, without clear structuring, integrating of education system? We may need an education summit among the leaders to discuss those aspects that is neglecting. How could we bring the formal education, the non-formal education, the informal education together in a system where it's seamless among us, so that our manpower can be transferred across the whole region without hiccup? Maybe we need to build human capacity in such a way that our manpower are powerfully able to move our society forward together. Education often are self-centric. It's for status, it's for degrees, it's for job. But we must move beyond that to life-centric, where people agree what is meaning, the meaning of life in our existence together, and move further to societal-centric, where we start utilizing what we have been educated and formed and shaped so that we could be useful for the larger populace and to be a global citizen in a unified pluralistic society. Once we build human capacity, it will be, while working together, we don't have all the resources to do it on our own. We need to distribute and mapping all the different issues among us so that we could see clearly who are in what. India is great in IT, great in a number of educational skills that you have. There's other in Asia are also as good in many other fields. How could we distribute those issues needed so that the development of our society could be complete, so that we don't have to do it all? I have proposed University of Calcutta when I visited University of Calcutta years ago. There should be an Institute of Thai Indian Studies, for example, so that it's a subset of that relationship of every aspect of Thai Indian society, so that it point direction to what we should do. We could have our counterpart in our university in Thailand to do Indian Thai Study Center, so that we have some guided ideas in how do we mesh ourselves together. We could move to Indian ASEAN Study Center, ASEAN Indian Study Center, and so on. This sort of thing would be very helpful in moving us forward, the education aspect. The fourth thing, let me be quick, niche partnership. At the different levels of education institution and society, maybe institute like this have a niche in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, in Pune, IT expertise. You could find IT niche with some universities in the ASEAN and work on those niche together in partnership so that you excel together, or entrepreneurship, or creative economy, or green energy, or medical hub, or health issues. Those sort of niche, if we could work it out in partnership and mapping them, it could be a very big help moving forward what we have talked about the last day and a half. I have defined the 3 components of innovation in my mind to my own National Research Council in my country, which I'm a member of. I said, to me, innovation without its 3 I's are not real innovation. The first one is ideation innovation. It must be a breakthrough in ideas to be innovation. Number 2, it must be implementation innovation. Innovation that can be implemented in our context. And third, impact innovation. Innovation that can be measured, impact can be measured. With that kind of ideas in mind, how can we be innovate among us as we integrate together, bridging together, that we become not just doing things in the same old way like many others who try to link up do. Innovate so that it's uniquely able to bridge us together. The 6th is measurement. We have talked about sustainable development for a long time with no clear definition. As economists, we like to measure. Without clear measurement, it's very hard for us to be able to specify where are we at, how can we manage, how far can we go, where is our end game. Sustainable development in Indian relationship with the rest of Asia, when you look east and act east, what does it mean? How do we measure? Those are some of the things we need to look at. Policy. We must work out together. Common policy, collective policy, that in agreement that we have that overlapping, so that it's helpful to build that relationship of integration. Number 8 is leadership. Let me mention, without political leadership and other kind of leadership, without political will or other kind of will to push through, we would never be able to succeed in all these look east, act east, think east. Unless the leadership is there in place, it's impossible. Things can be achieved only when leadership are allowed to function and leadership emerge. We need to identify those issues and work on it. And my last issue, civil society. It cannot be just top down from leadership, it has to be bottom up. It has to be people to people, as we have heard numerous times in this conference. We may have a wrong idea sometimes. The nuance behind a lot of our statements, it seems to be a negative sum game that we are talking about. When we are working together, sometimes we think we have to outcompete the other one, outwit the other one. If someone is able to gain something, we may be losing something. That is the mentality of a negative-sum game. Or at best, sometimes I hear it's a zero-sum game, where we think that has to be, if someone gets more, we get less. But I don't think that is the way it needs to be in our bridging the East. We could have a positive-sum game. When we trade together, when we invest, when we have economic engagement, it is a positive-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game or a negative-sum game. All of us could gain. And as we engage, our pie gets bigger. With that kind of mentality, maybe we will have more peace. We will have understanding with one another. Let me draw to a conclusion by saying this. If we talk about hard and soft power, let me nominate a more subcategory of those hard and soft power. I would like to call it hard power, soft power, hard soft power, and soft hard power. What do that mean? Your tracks that you have created is a very good illustration of what my conceptual framework I'm trying to bring. Hard power is defense and all those security track that we talk about, which is needed. Hard power. Soft power is what I'm talking here, education, culture. When you have the hard, soft power, it has to do with connectivity infrastructure. When you have soft, hard power, it has to do with trade, investment, the economic spheres. We need all four components to work, to be able to move forward. But what when we are engaging the other region of the world, other countries, we often deal with something really obvious. But like infrastructure, connectivity, we deal with a lot of things which is very obvious, the trade, the investment, we deal with the defense. But the education is a tag on. The culture is a soft one. It sounds very, very nebulous and unable to work. It's hard to articulate, hard to get it to the mechanism to be at work. The ASEAN community is a good example. There are two pillars. The economic one moving forward very fast. The political one are not too bad, but the social-cultural one is a very tough one, including the education. My proposal to you in ending my presentation would be, perhaps a lot of things that appear soft could be most powerful if we learn to engage the education and the culture, which is the soft aspect. It may really bring about that look is, act is, but we need to think is collectively. So that is because we are collectivism society. We are the people that are soft. Don't employ the other type of mentality so that we will succeed indeed when we think is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Professor Kingchak. May I now invite Mr. Satish Mehta, Director General, Indian Council for Cultural Relations.
Good afternoon, all of you. Our Look-East policy is not new. It's now being implemented with greater vigor. And at the pain of contradicting you, Professor, at least in the Foreign Ministry, we first thought it. Then we looked, and then we started acting on it. I have the particularly difficult task of speaking after three really eminent speakers. And the task is made more difficult by the fact that I stand between you and lunch, including my own lunch. While the title of the session is Education and Culture, Vectors of Sustainable Development, the sub-themes, at least those which are circulated to the speakers, cover peace as well. Understandably so, as peace contributes to sustainable development. Distinguished speakers before me have established, if at all it was required to be established, that education and culture are important vectors of growth and sustainable development. Some of the things I wanted to say thus have already been covered, so I won't tax your patience on those. Therefore, in the context of our Look and Act East policy, let me focus on why cooperation in culture can contribute to peace and easing of tensions, and what India is doing to strengthen its educational and cultural cooperation with countries in Southeast and East Asia. I suppose, getting to issues relating to peace comes very naturally to diplomats, and I think that's our first calling. Causes of disputes, discord, and conflict are many. Some are rooted in history, some in geography, some in greed, and some in perception of the self vis-a-vis the other. This is not the full laundry list of the causes of dispute, nor would I attempt to list those out. That could be done to, or what could be done to address these, that would transcend the theme of the session. Suffice it to say that understanding the culture of others and cultural engagement with others could contribute to bridging the perception syndrome and create a new narrative of we rather than us and them. With our Eastern countries, there is much that we have in common, and I have amongst our distinguished panelists current and former ambassadors of India to Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand. What else? Have I missed something? So, Philippines. I'm innocent of all that. I've never served east of India, so what I say is wisdom which has been handed over to me. With Eastern countries, as I mentioned, we have tremendous connectivity historically. And this came through form of Buddhism, Hinduism, shared epics, shared mythology. And as and when we actually start doing scientific research, we'll find there's a lot of shared DNA also. Once all the evidence has been fully discovered or uncovered, it would further reaffirm what some of us know instinctively. There is much that binds us together. Hopefully, this would contribute to bringing people together, at least in cases where there are no other causes of discord or dispute. So working on this conceptual construct, India supported restoration and preservation work in Angkor Wat, the world's largest Hindu temple complex, and many other places. Many Indians, including the president of ICCR, the current president of ICCR, Professor Lokesh Chandra, and his father, Professor Raghuveer, have done path-breaking and seminal work in researching India's ancient connections with countries to its east, and have made startling discoveries, which has inspired others. As our ambassador in Korea, and he's here, former ambassador in Korea is here, I was in Korea some time back, and it was really interesting to know that about 7 million Koreans share Indian DNA, because the princess from Ayodhya in 48 AD had gone to Korea, got married. She became the queen there. I mean, this is something perhaps lesser known, because we know a lot about our connectivity with Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Japan, but not so much about Korea. And I think these are things that we need to discover. And we in ICCR now are looking at setting up various groups to really uncover these hidden past connectivities, which would help strengthen our current relationships. A question was posed here by one of the speakers, one of the young students. What is Government of India doing about connecting, or I would say rather reconnecting India with East? Actually, we are doing quite a bit. We have cultural centers in Tokyo, Beijing, Seoul, Jakarta, Bali, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, and Yangon. And if we consider everything east from the perspective of Delhi, Then that would include Bangladesh and Bhutan, because I see Bhutanese ambassador is also here. So he's considered East, though India's borders go beyond Bangladesh and Bhutan to the eastern side. That would make 10 cultural centers, which is the largest concentration of Indian cultural centers in any geographical territory. We'll be opening one in Hanoi soon, so that will be 11th. That's a proof of the fact that we are thought, we are looked, and we are acting east. In addition, we have India, Mekong, Ganga countries, Asian Traditional Textiles Museum in Siem Reap, which also serves as an outpost for promoting Indian culture in that part of the world. In short, our footprint in Asia is already there considerably and is growing. Besides promoting Indian dance, music, our culture centers arrange a wide variety of events, basically to connect India to people in that part of the world. In recognition of the importance of academic and intellectual activities between two countries to promote understanding, we have set up 13 India Studies chairs in the East, and that again is a very large concentration of chairs. I won't say the highest, but it's a very large concentration of India Studies chairs, and we are planning to open some more. We're in negotiations, so hopefully we'll have much more chairs perhaps by the end of next year. And that again, we use the chairs now more creatively, and we want to actually make them as centers for not just the subjects that the chairs represent, but the whole gamut of Indian studies, as well as do seminars and conferences. So that would add to connectivity, and that would add to enhancing understanding between India and countries and peoples of the East. Another very important example of how we are looking and acting East is the resurrection of Nalanda University. I don't know if Secretary East in his presentation mentioned it, but I thought I'd just touch upon this. Nalanda was one of the foremost seats of education historically, and we are now resurrecting it. The work has begun. The Foreign Minister of India inaugurated it earlier this year, and we do hope that this university will once again be restored to its pristine glory and would become a major center for studies and for research on connectivity of India with Eastern countries. The next and important aspect is the linkage between the students. There's the academic side of it. ICCR administers about 270 scholarship schemes for students from the East, and we have a very large number of students who are present in India from East, including some in Pune. And we are now making tremendous effort to really give a great sense of India to these students beyond the academic education. Professor Dr. Dilip Padgaonkar has been helping us in that. At least we did a recent event in Pune, and he was the keynote speaker. Our idea is to spread this, to make students, when they go back to their respective countries as ambassadors of India, we want them to go back with great memories and great experience of India beyond what they learn in classrooms. And one of the part of the effort is getting distinguished Indian visitors to come and speak to them, take them to major industrial centers, research and development centers, where we carry, as well as historical places, so that they go back with a far greater and fuller knowledge of India and what we stand for and what we represent. Last but not the least, we are open to any new ideas or how we can strengthen our connectivity with the East. So I'll be very happy if in this time that you have with you, you can not just raise some questions, but also throw some ideas of what from your perspective would be the things that we could do as a government, particularly in the education and culture sector. Thank you very much.
We've got a very, very short time in case there are any questions from the floor. And if there are, then please let me know whom you want to address those questions to. I see no hands going up. There is one? Yes, please go ahead.
So, I wanted to ask, having Indian centers in Southeast Asian nations familiarizes the Southeast Asian people with India, but how do we connect Indians with Southeast Asia?
I think the Director General of ICCR is best placed to answer that question.
On the lighter note, we have enough Indians living there to connect them to India, but that's on the lighter note. More seriously, you see, when you set up chairs there, that's the one way of connecting. When we get students from those countries, that's another way of connecting. But we also see that one of the tasks is also of the other countries to connect to India, because it will take two for a tango.
Okay, any more questions? No. Well, that brings us to the end of this session. I'd like to thank all our 4 panelists, and I'd like to thank them because I think they have each one helped us better understand hard issues, soft issues, hard soft issues, and soft hard issues. So give them a big hand, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Whose is this? You want to say?
May I now request Ambassador Devre, Ramsati Chair Professor at the Symbiosis International University, to kindly felicitate the dignitaries on the dais. Dr. Dilip Padgaonkar. Mr. Satish Mehta. Dr. Anand Durayappa. Ms. Pallavi Iyer. Professor Kringsak. Thank you, sir. The next session will start after lunch at 3 o'clock. So please be seated by 2:50 so that we can start the session on time. Thank you.